We'll see when it
Okay.
picks up.
It is wise to record in the recording that yes, you are
Everybody, I'm
you
recording.
No
you are
future-
recording. Well, no, there are some legal
Yeah.
stuff when you're recording.
Yep.
If somebody says that, hey, nobody told me, you can get in trouble. So
Well, I was there in the transcript too.
I belt and suspenders. Okay, can you see my screen?
No.
Well, shoot, this was supposed to be easy. All right.
Did you? Is it telling you that it can't present?
Yeah, no, it's now saying click share screen. Double click on desktop window, share your screen. Hey, it wants to share. Choose what you like to share. Whole screen. Click on share. It didn't complain this time. So I'm assuming it's sharing.
No.
Is it not sharing?
What is your browser?
I'm using Chrome on Mac OS.
Okay.
All right. So I have an alternate. Let's see. I'm an attendee.
I
Huh.
just made you into an attendee. Hey, this is Suraj.
All
Hey,
right.
Suraj.
Okay.
Guess
All
it
right.
is
You know,
almost
if
the
no,
last
I'm
time.
gonna reload.
It still says that you are a guest. I don't know how Teams work. But
There's like only two hard problems in technology, and like sharing things with other people is one of them.
Oh,
Oh,
don't
yes.
forget printers.
And printers. Well, that's obvious.
Okay. So I have clicked on share one last time. Did anything happen useful?
not yet.
Not yet. All right. So I have an alternative for you. Here's what I'm going to do. Why don't we? I will share on the chat. The URL is a PowerPoint slide. I bet you guys can show PowerPoint. And if you can't, well, okay then. So let's see here. Yeah, so since this thing is itself public, the badge application is itself open source, and its code's on GitHub, and I include in it a little briefing about this thing. And so let's see. All right, so let me give a brief. While you do that, why don't I just start talking? Can you click on that link and try to just, okay. So best practices badge, for those who are not aware of it. Back in 2014, the Heartbleed vulnerability made rounds. People very, very concerned when they looked at how OpenSSL was developing the software. They were not doing a lot of practices that I think people were kind of expecting such an important project to do. And so the push was made, we need to identify what the best practices are and then see if projects are doing them, encourage projects to do them. And that's the background of this CII best practices badge. Yeah, basically, I led a number of folks to look at, well, both materials, but also in particular, widely used open source projects that were considered to be well run, and tried to kind of distill what are the things that they're doing that seem to be especially good practices. Next. So it's not true that all insecure, not everybody is secure. Next. Is basically we're trying to encourage that. Next. Okay, there we go. So this is basically practices for producing open source software. There are literally millions of open source software projects I have counted, and it's really not reasonable to try to make every single one of them go through some sort of external lab. Nobody has the kind of money for that, for one thing. So we instead focused on self-certification. Projects show up to answer questions, fill in a form basically. Self-certification has known weaknesses, so we try to counter that in various ways. So for example, we automate, we actually don't reject some claims if we don't have good evidence of them. I will automatically fill in some answers. We do public display of the answers for criticism. We do spot checks, and we can override them if they're, for example, if they're blazingly false. Next. It's under the LF CII. It's an open source project on GitHub, and yes, we're on our own badge because I'm a big non-believer in hypocrisy. Next. Next. Okay, so if nothing else, if you're running an open source project, I would love it if you would go to this website, bestpractices.coreinfrastructure.org, click on that big green button and start the process of getting a badge. Next. Here's some of the projects that have earned a badge. That includes the Linux kernel, Kubernetes, Node.js, there's curl, lots of folks. Next. This is actually slightly old. We now have over 3,300 projects participating and over 460 who have earned at least a passing badge. Next. So there are 3 badge levels, passing, silver, gold. To meet the higher one, you first have to meet the previous level. The passing badge is trying to capture what well-run projects typically already do. Totally not interested in some researcher thinks this would be a cool idea, but no one does that. Don't care. We want to see things done in practice first. So we went out, looked at lots of different projects, found a bunch of criteria, grouped them into these categories. Next. Silver is harder but possible for one-person projects, and gold has criteria that users would love it if the projects would do these things, but they're not possible for single-person projects. And there are a lot of essentially single-person projects. And so we want to make it so that those projects could do a lot of things. But gold has things like you've got to have a bus factor of more than 1. Next. These are kind of the meta criteria for the criteria. What does it take to become a criterion? So it has to be relevant, attainable, clear, and so on. Next. Here are the non-requirements. I think these are important. I think these are important for any other metrics that you are trying to develop, is trying to, where you can, well, the CI badge specifically does not require any specific technology project or service. It doesn't require any programming language. It doesn't forbid any programming language. We do include tips for common cases, but that's all they are. I guess an exception is we do expect that projects will have a web page and they're going to use TLS. That's, I think, a very reasonable expectation for projects today. It never requires proprietary software service. You absolutely can use it. You can depend on it. We don't require the use of any proprietary software service because there's a number of folks who will object if we did that. Doesn't cost anything, doesn't take over. And probably the most important thing is that we make sure that people don't have to do everything all at once. Most folks strive for a badge, they find a few things that they're missing, and over time they address those. Next. All right, for this group, probably this is a useful thing to see is just what do the criteria look like. Every criterion has a short name, a little identifier that's out in the square brackets at the end here. And then there's the text. So the project website must succinctly describe what the software does, what problem does it solve. It's remarkable how many open source projects say, hey, here we are, we're a project, but no clue what it is. We're implemented in Python. That's great. I still don't know what you do. You must have at least one automated test suite released as FLOSS, free libre open source software. It can be maintained as a separate project, that's fine, but there has to be a test suite. You have to use at least one static analysis tool. You've got to have HTTPS with TLS. This last one's actually right now the most common missed criterion. The project must publish the process for reporting vulnerabilities on the project website. So basically, if you find a vulnerability in it, it needs to be very easy to find out how to report that vulnerability. And these criteria are available in a variety of languages. We've got English, Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Russian. All right, next. And of course, once you have criteria, you have to have a scoring system to obtain a badge. You have to, all the must or must nots have to be met. The shoulds have to be either met or unmet with the justification. And the suggestions, you just have to answer the question. There we're relying on psychology. People don't like admitting that they don't do something if it's kind of obvious they should be doing it. And sometimes require URL to point to basically the evidence. Next. I mentioned earlier we have automation, so we do try to fill in information if we can determine they met or don't meet a particular criterion. That helps, of course, make it easier. We can reject some obviously incorrect claims. More automation. I'm sure that's one of those. You could always have more, but we already do have some automation there. Some larger organizations are requiring badging. We've got ONAP and CNCF has it as a graduation requirement. I've just talked to LF Energy's TAC yesterday, and they are currently planning. They're having a vote over the next over a period of time to decide whether or not they're going to require this badging badge for the energy projects as well. And right now it sounded like the answer is probably yes, but they need to make that determination themselves. And of course, there's all sorts of ways to support easy display of badge info. This is actually probably especially of interest to this group. There's a GitHub style badge, and you just put in a README, but there's also a REST API and CORS. So, and in fact, I had a meeting with one of the members recently, just kind of one-on-one, kind of discussing how to get information from the CI Best Practices badge into other tools. So the quick answer is REST API JSON is your friend. So we've got we can provide all sorts of information. We have a query interface. I actually recently added some additional mechanisms to try to make it especially easy for some issues. Happy to make some changes to try to make it easier to support integration into other systems because we've got some interesting, what hopefully is interesting information, and we want to make sure that you can get it if you want it. Next.
Before you move on there, can you get
please.
into the automation a little bit more? It's like I've gone through it. I didn't see anything that would be obviously rejected. It seemed like there's some stuff that you obviously couldn't find with automation in 100% of the cases, but it seemed like you could always just kind of override that.
No, there are. Okay, if this is something I don't really discuss very much in the slide deck. But the code itself is open source, so worst comes to worst, you can always look at that.
Right.
What you're looking for is there's a section of the code where there's something called a chief and a whole bunch of detectives. Each detective is there to examine certain kinds of data to determine the answers to certain questions. Internally, it scores them. It proposes an answer and it scores them on a scale of just arbitrarily 1 through 5 for the confidence it has. This is actually one of the challenges that we have is that, for some of these, you can guess what the answer probably is, but it's not at all certain for sure. So if an answer is a 4 or a 5 on the confidence level, we actually reject what the human claims if it's different.
Okay.
So basically, many answers, what we find is we can determine the answer with some confidence. Like I'll give you, for instance, we can detect that in certain cases tests exist, but there isn't a standard way to determine, do you have automated testing?
Right.
So we can detect it and we'll give when we detect it's true, we have a very high confidence in it.
Right.
But we have a very low confidence in whether or not we have it if we don't find something. There's a million ways to do tests. And so there are a couple where we just say, no, you don't have it. But a vast number of situations, it's more nuanced than that. And,
Do you have an
I
example of one of those negative ones where you can actually prove somebody doesn't have it?
Not offhand. We do. There are examples, but I'll
Sure.
have to I'll have to go do a quick dig on there to find some examples of that. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it turns out to be a challenge.
Right.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then
By the way,
one last one on that is,
Uh-huh.
like, do you ever rerun these checks, or is it all kind of just it's point in time, right?
currently today it is point in time whenever someone attempts to edit the project entry.
Right.
So whenever they make an edit, we then run these basically to reject clearly false answers. If for nothing, is actually the primary reason we do it. We have we definitely eventually intend to run them periodically. But for various reasons, we haven't done that. So that is something that one of the challenges is if we run them periodically, then we need to report back. If we say disable somebody's badge, we want to tell them, hey, here's why that happened instead of just here's the big surprise. So I think the goal was really to try to start doing that and then warning people before starting to remove badges that were previously earned due to improved automation or frankly the risk of a error in code or misunderstanding of situation.
Okay.
By the way, I probably shouldn't have said this early. Right now, the TAC and governing board are kind of trying to figure out what to do with various CII projects. This is actually probably the one that's most complicated, the CI best practices badge. It's not clear whether its home is in this working group or the best practices working group, because this group is focused very much on metrics. And it's definitely being discussed as one option. In fact, is that this badging becomes one of the CI best practices badge becomes one of the things that's part of what this working group oversees. If you have a preference pro or con, let the OpenSSF folks, let folks know basically. But this is something that's currently in discussion. Okay. Next. All right, so the good news, and really the whole point of this badging process was to encourage projects to make changes to make things better. So OWASP Zap, for example, added automated testing specifically to get a badge. It's not that they were opposed to automating testing, it's just one of those never got around to it, and this basically convinced them to do it. And of course, once they finally added automated testing, they said, wow, we're so glad we did that. Next. All right, conclusions. If you're involved, encouraged to get a badge. We encourage folks to prefer open source software from projects getting a badge. And if you think there are needs for criteria refinements and so on, let us know. And thank you very much for your time. And I'm sorry for the technical problems that we had at the beginning there. Sharing screens is supposed to be easy. So my sincere thanks for your flexibility there.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Okay, that's it.
Cool.
So how do we want to make I think it's useful to discuss in this working group, how do we want to make the decision about where the best practices badge lands in the working groups and the OpenSSF working groups?
I mean, so one thing we could do is give folks time to digest if folks need time to kind of think about this. Off the top of my head, I'm David. We'd love to have you. So, like,
well, thank you.
Off the bat, you just want to say that. I mean, I think it's in which working group would the goals of the badging program flourish and or consolidate into something even larger or better or whatnot, or does it make sense strategically to always keep them separate? I don't know, like none of the options seem like obviously bad options to me. So I don't have a strong preference.
I mean, I agree with that. I think there's one other part we should think about too, and that's the technical implementation. Right. So right now, if the badging work and the way that it operates makes sense in this group or the other group because they can share code and they're doing kind of similar things. We should consider that as well. I know that the best practices working group is focused on education and using a different platform for that. And then we've got something that's kind of similar to what the badging system does. So that would kind of be my argument to put it here. But I think there's definitely coordination that needs to happen as far as defining what those best practices are so that we're teaching things in the educational side that accrue to the thing that we're then measuring via one of these tools.
Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, I should note that for the CII, it's very much focused on open source software best practices. So, for example, things that enable, worldwide collaboration, which might not be appropriate for a proprietary product, for example. So, there's some interesting scope things as well. So,
yep.
Okay.
Cool.
So-
we had a couple hands up. Kamala Schwat?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so I was wondering, I had gone through the CI badge process last week. It looks very exhaustive. To the point that I actually gave up after like 20 minutes of it. So I'm just trying to understand what is the kind of target audience we are looking at. Meaning, is it all the small developers? Because personally, I also have a few open source libraries, obviously very small scale. But when we look at a CI badge or the responsibility of this group, what is the kind of target audience we are looking at? Am I, meaning people like me who is a small time open source developer, am I also included in this, or is it only supposed to be for big projects like Kubernetes and all?
Oh, no, absolutely small projects. So I mentioned, now the gold badge, we are assuming multiple users, although the multiple contributors, although even that isn't that high a bar. But yeah, absolutely, a small JavaScript library is absolutely within scope. And if you had 20 minutes, typically it takes about 25 minutes. So in our experience to go through the process. So it's not trivial, and but it shouldn't be too hard. If something was making it unusually hard, let me know, and we'll see what we can do over time to make your experience easier. The automation is also supposed to help,
Exactly.
and that's something that I am certain that automation can be improved. In fact, that's one of those you'll never be done with automation. So. And that may be something that can be shared easily, between different projects too. Is having tools that do automated analysis and then report back for multiple different purposes. So yeah, but it's absolutely intended for use by both small and large projects.
All right, because I think that would help a lot, because if the automation side of things could at least cover like 50% of the requirements by scanning the project, that would help a lot.
Right.
Because
It already does.
otherwise
It already does that. Right. It already does
okay.
that. The problem is it may not do as much automation as you want it to, but it does do auto. But I mean, some things are very hard to automate. Like, does your project front page describe what the project does? I mean, I guess we could pull in some AI technologies and look for this project, some sort of description that looks like a description. But many of the other things, like do you use version control? That's already automated. The problem children are one like, do you do automated testing? We can detect that in some cases, but not in many others.
Correct. All right. I was just wondering, because I actually tried going through the process. So,
okay. Please talk to me later, because it really shouldn't be that hard. So, and many other small projects have done it. So I'd love to know where it seemed to be along the rough side. Maybe what you were doing is something different than what we were expecting.
Probably, yes. Maybe I ended up on the wrong side of the site, I think.
Yeah, well, for example, if you don't give us the repo URL, because that's a possibility. If you only give us the homepage URL and don't give us the repo URL, a lot of the automated analyses don't work because there's no code to analyze.
Obviously, yeah. No, I had given my GitHub URL, but yeah, I think we should take it offline and should
Okay,
only
yeah,
discuss
please.
this.
Yeah, because it shouldn't be that hard. Okay.
Yeah, all right,
Cool.
cool.
Thanks. And Dan, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I like the way Ryan kind of framed it before. There's two main components to this. There's like the documentation / that list of best practices, which has the actual names and criteria that are written in that super generic way. And then there's the automation. And I think, one of the worries that I would have is if there's a different group that says that they're the best practices group and they're coming up and publishing lists of best practices, that we would end up with two things that are, different or in conflict or basically just confusing, even if they are the same thing. And if somebody's trying to figure out which things to follow, which one is it? And I think we want to make sure to try to avoid that confusion where possible. Maybe separating out to that kind of the measurement implementation side versus the actual where these things are discussed and agreed upon. Useful.
So let me propose a process. I wonder if we can, and we can talk through this, but I would like to have a recommendation made to the TAC in the next TAC meeting. So that would be like a week from today, I think is when it is, something like that.
I think it's the 22nd.
22nd, okay.
Next Tuesday.
And then, so it feels like what needs to happen between now and then is maybe the leads of this project and the best practices project should meet to decide on which place they would recommend it being. And then if there's some sort of, after that meeting, if there's some sort of vote that whichever of those working groups it's decided to be in needs to happen, then there'd be some sort of like a doodle poll. So David, that's what you're doing already with the edX training with the best practices group. So if we can follow a process, kind of similar to that, and then get a recommendation to the TAC on the 22nd. Does that sound reasonable?
It does to me.
Yeah, I think process-wise, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to sort of riff just a little bit on what Dan said as well. He mentioned something I think is kind of important here, and that's that, maybe teasing out who is defining these metrics specifically. So if that could be sort of a coordinated effort between the two groups, so we might want to call that out as like a project or whatever our appropriate terminology is here, where that collaboration between the two, and then there's the working group that's specifically best practices building the educational platform, and then there's the working group that is this one that's building the metrics dashboard and APIs and all that kind of thing. But then there's a subcommittee initiative, whatever project thing that between the two, a subset of people are the ones that are responsible for defining that.
And it might just make sense that we need to rename the groups as well, similarly to how this group used to be securing open source software, and we had to narrow the scope. We might want to relabel stuff just so that it makes sense. A quick question I had on operations. So like a lot of this is automated, but in terms of the like human backend part of managing the CII badging, how did that work when it was still under CII, and like what would a group be inheriting at this point operationally?
Well, let's see here. I'm the lead of the CI best practices badge effort. So I'm not sure exactly I understand your question, but I mean the CII badging project was designed so that it was we could basically just run as much as possible with hands off. So it's currently running on AWS under Heroku, and I have made a couple changes primarily to tweak to make it a little more some of the data more easily accessible to some of the OpenSSF folks. But day to day, it keeps running. The whole goal was to let it run as much as possible hands off. So there's an occasional maintenance kind of stuff, updating libraries, that sort of thing. But even the updating libraries, there's an automated test suite. So hey, update a library, runs through the automated tests, everything passes, ship. Is that
perfect?
Does
So
that
yeah, no,
kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so, because I was really just wondering like how much human in the loop actually has to happen for this, and it sounds like very, very little. So
Yeah, I mean, and the LF has, unless somebody tells me otherwise, for the level of effort that the CI badging project is right now, the LF's willing to just straight up foot the bill as just one of the things that I do. Because it's at this point, if it's just a matter of, hey, keep things running, keep the lights going, it isn't that much effort. Now, if, oh my gosh, we're going to change everything, then we have to figure things out. But
sure.
just keeping it, but just keeping it running. Really the main thing that hits is, and I'm sure all of you will appreciate this, a serious vulnerability has been found in one of the subcomponents we use. It happens. So we actually have multiple mechanisms to get warned about that. And so we update, run the automated test, ship, and our general goal is to, from warning to ship to production within an hour. And almost always just happens. It's usually not we just try to make sure that happens rapidly before somebody tries to exploit something. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. That was a very good discussion. So kind of moving on from there, we've got a couple other items I'd like to get through on the project status. I don't know, Jennifer, if you wanted to kind of lead this, or I mean, I think most of it's just on the discussion, but
I missed the last one, so I'm probably not the one to lead it this time, but happy to next time.
That works. Yeah. So basically, development of the dashboard has kind of continued. So the metrics, we had there were a couple discussions that went on kind of low-hanging fruit. The feeling that I got out of the discussion last time was, let's not boil the ocean, and instead focus on a small number of key, well measurable metrics that got the discussion with the badge program set up. So I guess what I have to say there, and I can give a kind of a quick, I think I can give a quick, well, the demo is probably not interesting. Right now there is a how do I go about this? So we need to be able to collect metrics. So we need some sort of a job scheduling analysis thing. So the way that we implemented this right now is a separate kind of Docker container that has a bunch of jobs. One of those jobs is a collector from CII, from the badge stuff. So as you ingest a project, you ingest, zlib, GitHub Madler zlib, and it goes into a queue. The Docker container wakes up, looks at the queue, says, "Hey, I need to update this information from the badge program." Calls the API, brings back the data, stuffs it into throws it back into a queue, which has another collector that brings it back into the database, and now the website is updated. Right now, we're just showing a badge and the raw data, but we can, obviously, now that we have the data, we can make it look like whatever we want. So we have a kind of a integrated thing there. But I think more importantly, it opens it up to lots of other things. So we have a collector for identifying interesting characteristics of source code. So this will do a download the package and scan through it looking for interesting things. We can do static analysis at this point. We can really do whatever we want. So whether it's stuff that happens locally or stuff that we would call out to an API, I think that architecture, I think, makes sense, at least until we get so big that we need to make this super complicated. So I feel good about our ability to bring in new projects and collect relevant information. The hard part now is what is the relevant information. But if we're going to stick with just the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are easy to measure, I think we're in pretty good shape. I would like to welcome Suraj Jacob to the call. Suraj is on my team, and he's currently working on work to extend the OSS Gadget open source tool that we released to normalize project metadata. So similar to kind of what Libraries.io sort of does, this would go out and say, if I'm interested in metadata for GitHub Madler zlib or npm express or RubyGems, foo, it would go out, collect the metadata in whatever way makes sense, normalize it, and give back a kind of the same, let's say, schema back. That's the schema that I think we should use to import new projects into this metrics dashboard. So I want to externalize those kind of complexities as much as possible, and not have to write like 30 different project importer things, because those aren't a lot of fun. I still think that end of October is reasonable for an MVP. However, I would like to get more kind of participation in kind of, well, from this working group in all this stuff. So I added in the meeting notes areas for participation. I'm looking for names. So I'm looking for people that are like super passionate about like project management and like making this machine work, because I am not a project management is not my superpower. API design, UX is definitely not my superpower. Ryan, I think you have the corner for this. Development I can do, but lots of other people can do as well. Operations, I would love somebody that was like, yo, this makes sense, but on a single person, on a single like machine, I can make it run like in like this, wonderful Kubernetes fluid cloud of expansion and all of that. And then testing, we need folks to hit it and test away. And then of course, up above, like still refining metrics and saying this is what a metric should look like. Active maintainers make sense to be, people that have done anything with a project over the past year count as a contributor, or that doesn't make sense and it should be this other thing. Just kind of refining these things out. Yeah, so I would love to have you folks put your name, presumably, next to some of these, and then, as a working group, I probably should have started this like a couple weeks ago when we started these conversations, but I think philosophically, I think this working group should be very much, startup mentality. So if there's something that needs to be done, just do it. Like jump in there. You don't have to ask permission. As we, if that becomes a problem, then we'll add a little bit, we'll sprinkle a little bit more structure in. But this is not a top-down, or it just should not be a top-down thing, in my opinion, at least.
Hey, Michael, you can put my name
Quick question.
on.
Oh, sorry.
We're talking. You can put my name on project management.
Yay!
Yeah.
Thank you, Kay.
Yeah, that ends up being one of my superpowers, I think. So, and I would have put my name there myself, but I don't have edit access to it.
Oh,
so,
I'm sorry.
But that's okay. I requested it, but you're leading the meeting, so later if you can add me.
Same.
I am adding those right now for everybody.
Thank you.
And Ryan, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was going to say real quick. So if we're volunteering, you can put me on UX, and I'm also ironically pretty good at REST API design, so I could help with that too. But the main topic I was going to add was, so if we're talking about help with dev work, and we're also talking about potentially merging, integrating, whatever that conversation is with the CII badging program, do we need to sort of rehash architectural sort of tech stack type things as well to make those things align? Or for now, we're just going to operate separate and then we'll deal with it later?
My opinion here is the world uses REST APIs. Let's just, the technology stack should not be so interesting that choosing one would like make integration with another one harder. Just have everything speak REST, and then if we need to integrate, we integrate.
Yeah, for REST, I think that totally makes sense. API wise, I was thinking more of like, I'm assuming the badge program has like these crawlers as part of the automation as well as we do. Like, do we need to make those parts sort of align better or keep separate?
Seems like that's something that
Maybe
probably
for
we
now,
want
it
to
doesn't
look
make
at.
sense.
Yeah, the specific the little detective systems right now is separately invoked. It is just invoked when you edit. There isn't a REST API for those, but that could change. No one's ever asked for it. But I agree with you that having a REST API to enable integrations makes a whole lot of other tech decisions a whole lot less critical to deal with. So I'll have to look into it, but I don't see any fundamental problem with exposing that information through a REST API, and then we can share the same tech stack or not. It's okay.
Yep. The other thing there,
Cool.
so
That
the way that I kind of did the V1 of the job runner thing is because it is just a Docker container, and it is just launching a shell script for each crawler, discoverer, whatever you want to call it. So if there's one it's all Ruby and whatever, then it calls the Ruby one. And if there's a Python, it just calls Python. It does not matter at all. It just needs to run on that in that container OS. And if we have something that needs to run in a different OS, we'll just create a different container and we'll have it pull from a different queue, or we'll make that work.
Yeah, and although the best practices one doesn't work that way now, that's certainly a doable thing. Now, I will say there's probably one distinction is that the CII one, there's very much a time limit because it's part of an edit cycle. So they, if we can't find out immediately, it's not going to, we don't automate that. Whereas if I think in your situation, you're not time bound, and I think that makes a big difference.
Yes. Cool. So Ryan, since you were talking, I was wondering. So UX, one of the, how is that going?
Yes, that's a great question. So I started a little bit of integrating some updates. Unfortunately, I've been swamped with some other issues the past week, but I'm getting through my list, and so that is going to be my next thing that I'm doing. But I know, so we've had conversations with Dan and Kim at Google on some updates and stuff that we want to do around there. So I'm incorporating those, and so by early next week, I'll definitely have an updated document that we can start iterating on.
Cool. Is it substantially similar to the screenshots that you sent out a couple weeks ago, or should I just ignore that?
Yeah, it's mostly tweaks on that. Like, so I didn't like drastically redefine everything.
Okay.
So yeah, it's iterative for sure.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. So let me add that.
Yeah, I'll share it out early next week, if not by the end of this week.
Also, are we using any front-end frameworks or CSS frameworks, anything?
Right now, it's just Bootstrap and a custom theme, but depending on
Cool.
Whatever makes sense. If you're referring to like, is this like a React thing?
Oh no, I was
Angular?
referring to I was referring to something like Bootstrap itself.
Yeah. But Bootstrap is, at least in my opinion, is good enough for like 90%. And unless we're gonna like really differentiate ourselves on the UX, we can make it better in the future.
Yeah, just something out of the blue, because I've been recently using the Microsoft's Fluent Design Fabric core. So I was just wondering what we are using here.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to use that, but
Yeah.
maybe in the future.
All right, sure.
Okay, so I've got a couple names next to things. On the areas for participation. I would love to get some folks not from Microsoft, like signed up on these.
It still doesn't look like there's edit access.
Oh, seriously. I could have sworn that I actually sent. So I've approved. I'm now
You have to
approving
refresh
the last.
to get it.
Yeah. Okay. So Jonathan, I just hit send to approve yours, and Radek to yours. Okay, Radek, yours is sent. Everybody else's that I have an email as of. Yeah, I think I should be caught up now. So yeah, please add your names. They're particularly on the operations side. I am going to plan myself to stop at this runs nicely on a single server with like local Postgres and whatnot. So taking it beyond that is something that I would look to one of you to drive and run and kind of own that piece. Cool. We have 4 minutes left. Open it up. Is there anything that anyone would like to talk about?
Of the
What are the next steps with getting? Oh, go ahead, David. Sorry.
I was going to say, of the many things one could measure, do you have a short list of, here's the first 2 measurements or 3 measurements that we're going to be integrating into this dashboard?
So that's a great question. The answer is that we have some things that we've built collectors for just through proof of concept. So we have those. Those probably are not the very most important ones. The ones that we have that are integrated into this new collector mabob thing is a CII badge data, typo squatting, source code characteristics, and one that came from Dan, which is, Dan and Kim, which is do all pull requests have an approval, have 2-person approval. And the way that I can actually show this real quick, which will give you an idea on what this actually looks like. I think that's it. Yeah. Can you guys see the Chrome window?
Yep.
Cool. So this is one of the collectors, GitHub PR approval. And what it does is it takes in a basically a GitHub project, and it goes out using the whatever GitHub API, and it looks through each pull request that has been closed. I think it looks at the first 100. And it looks to see if there is a review done by someone who is not the pull request author. I think that is the right logic to determine that there was a separate approver, and then you just get back the number of pulls with an outside reviewer, and then the ratio of the two, and then we can use that to pass judgment later on whether or not that number is what we want. I have no idea what the bar is on that. Even what I've noticed anecdotally is there are a lot of pull requests that don't get a review, that the reviewer is the author, even on well-maintained big projects. So that's kind of what it looks like. and this is just a script that just runs within the Docker container. So to your to your question, David, yes, there's like 4 or 5. We'll probably have maybe 10 for the October release. Anything else? 1 minute left.
So real quick, what are the next steps as far as coordinating with the other group, and who's going to drive that side of things?
On the badge program consolidation move working group thing?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
If you want, I'm happy to set up the meeting. I'm thinking me, you, David, and I don't recall the lead of the best practice working group.
Javier.
Javier. Okay.
It's Javier, yeah.
Yeah. So is the 4 of us the right quorum for that?
That probably makes sense just to start the conversation at least. Yeah.
Sorry, did you say that you would start the conversation, or you would be happy for me to start it?
Sorry. I think those 4 people make sense to start the conversation. Is what I said. Apologies.
Perfect. I will make that happen later this week, so we can wrap that up for early next week.
Awesome. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Appreciate
Thanks,
everybody's
everyone.
time. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.